You're sage-ish. I think
Yes.
we can put it that
Yes.
way. Mark Woolhouse, have we peaked? Are we over the worst?
Hope so. Very much hope so, like everyone else. Certainly, the number of cases in England has not risen anywhere near some of the more pessimistic predictions that people were making only a few weeks ago. And as you say, they have showed a marked sign of decline. Just when we're starting to feel optimistic, of course, that rate of decline has noticeably slowed in the past 7 days.
So we're
And
plateauing, not falling. Is that fair?
yes, well, it does seem to be. Hospitalizations are starting to come down, which is encouraging. And I have to say, it has proved very difficult for everyone to predict what will happen over this very complicated phase of the epidemic, where the vaccine's being rolled out, behaviour is changing because restrictions are being removed, and we're having to deal with a new variant that we've only known about for a few months. It's genuinely quite difficult to predict, but I am optimistic myself.
And given the level both of infection and the level of vaccine, are we approaching herd immunity now? Have we hit herd immunity?
Quite possibly. But now we get into the more complicated bits. Herd immunity is not an all or nothing thing. And when we've hit the herd immunity threshold for one level of transmission, say just before the Freedom Day, as it was called on July the 19th, doesn't mean that if we don't start to behave differently and the transmission picks up again, that the herd immunity threshold bar is raised that bit higher. So it's going to be a very cautious period for epidemiologists like me to predict of just how close are we to it, and can small changes in the behaviour over the coming weeks and months take us away from it again.
So just to be clear, I think we all remember that with old variants, herd immunity predictions were lower than people like yourself now say we might need. Well, what percentage do you say now would mean herd immunity compared to what we were told, let's say, a year ago?
It will be considerably higher bar now because the Delta variant is twice as infectious, twice as transmissible as the original strains that came into the UK in March 2020. And that's a huge difference. And that raises the bar from somewhere around under 70% to almost certainly well over 80%. It slightly depends on exactly who is vaccinated. But nonetheless, the bar has been raised considerably by the Delta variant. If it hadn't been for the Delta variant, I'd be sitting here telling you now that I thought we were very close to herd immunity threshold, if not over it, and we could be very confident going forward. But unfortunately, the Delta variant has changed the game.
And do you think that that has changed people's behaviour because people feel that the goalposts were unfairly moved? You've explained why the goalposts were, in your view, fairly and reasonably moved, but it doesn't help people's trust in experts, does it, when they think, oh, we're never going to be over this, they just want us to be in lockdown forever?
No, I do have some sympathy with what you're saying there. It does always sound like the epidemiologists are gloomy and pessimistic, and as you say, moving the goalposts. But unfortunately, it's true. The Delta variant really did move the goalposts. That actually happened, and we have to deal with that situation as we find it.
So
But
sorry to interrupt. You said well over 80% is what you would now consider to be herd immunity. And are you talking 89% or 82%? What roughly
yeah,
are you thinking about?
we can't say it with that level of precision. With something like measles, where immunity is really solid against measles, I mean, basically very, very few people get measles twice. You're more or less immune or not. It's easier to calculate. But with this infection, the novel coronavirus infection, neither natural immunity nor the vaccine-induced immunity are perfect. They're a bit leaky. And that raises the bar further. That means more people have to have been exposed or preferably vaccinated in order to reach that herd immunity threshold. So it's harder to calculate. I would put it in the high 80s, but that's an estimate. It's not a fixed.
And we're not there yet.
We're pretty close. 90% of adults have had some sort of vaccination, and even the first dose gives you some protection. But no, we're not. There are still somewhere around 8 million adults in the UK that have not been vaccinated. And of course, we've only just agreed to vaccinate 16 to 17-year-olds. So there's still quite some way to go before everybody who could catch and pass on this infection has been vaccinated.
And once we hit herd immunity, how long can we keep it without booster jabs?
Well, that's a very good question. For obvious reasons, nobody knows yet over what time period either natural or vaccine-induced immunity might wane. It's looking good at the moment. The evidence is that it's certainly persistent for a few months, and it may be longer than that. So that's encouraging. But we also don't know quite how people's behaviour is going to change over the coming winter months as well. And as I say, if people start to behave more towards pre-pandemic normality, then of course that raises the bar that bit further. So I suspect we're going to be bouncing around either side of the herd immunity threshold for quite a few months to come, probably over the whole winter.
So, given that, obviously, the pressure to get those 8 million unvaccinated over 16s vaccinated is higher than ever. How would you like to see them persuaded, cajoled, nudged to get the jab?
Well, as you've gathered, I'm very much in favour of all age groups that the JCVI has recommended be vaccinated getting the vaccine. So it is tremendously important that they are encouraged to do so. My personal preference, this is just my personal preference, is that it's better to do this with carrot rather than stick. But if that means that people can undertake some activities safely, having been vaccinated, then I'm in favour of that. There's a lot of discussion about vaccine passports of any form, which has a lot of dimensions to it, obviously, not just scientific. But from my perspective, as an epidemiologist, the vaccine passport idea works. It does deliver a reduction in transmission and allows people to do activities safer. So I'm not saying categorically we should or shouldn't have it. That's a wider discussion. But I am saying that the scientific evidence is that vaccine passports are a good way to go.
And what about other things that could be done apart from vaccines? So, north of the border in Scotland, more ventilation systems. That doesn't seem to have been adopted in England.
No, absolutely. We've always been clear here in Scotland, where I am, that it wouldn't be a full return to normality even once we remove the restrictions. We have a phrase beyond level zero for the mitigation measures that need to be kept in place. So ventilations in indoor settings where people are gathering, masks in some circumstances, and certainly case detection and tracing of contacts as well, and certainly self-isolation of cases. We're trying to move away from self-isolation of contacts to replace that with testing. But all those things, I think, are going to have to carry on certainly over the next winter and possibly longer than that. But hopefully, that we're all beginning to get used to this now, and none of this will be seen as quite the imposition we might have imagined that we'd have to still be under some months ago.
And are there any circumstances that you think we'd go back to restrictions? So not behavioural changes, as you've been saying, that we're getting used to, but more draconian.
Well, it's possible to imagine anything. I don't know whether it's a very useful exercise to do so. What I would say is that for people like myself, trying to advise government on how to proceed and how fast to unlock, this determination that we could never go backwards has actually been quite unhelpful. It inevitably makes the advice more cautious. If we can't go backwards, then we're very, very cautious about being unlocking. If what I think we need, because we're dealing with a novel virus with still uncertain potential, we don't know how much this thing will evolve in the future, then we should leave the door open to responding in whatever way is necessary in the future. I very, very much hope we won't have to go backwards, at least not backwards too far. But I think we have to have that possibility and keep it open just in case there is a public health emergency that none of us have foreseen at this stage.
And when you hear politicians say, this is the terminus, this will be the last time, this is it, I promise. Do you obviously don't approve of them saying that, but do you think that is political rather than scientific or medical?
Well, you'll have to ask them sort of why the politicians favour this kind of language. What I would like to see is a movement from when the worrying about the virus, what it's doing, what the winter trends are, whether a new variants, is something that goes on almost behind the scenes in public health, as it does every single year for flu. Public health people are always exploring worst case scenarios with flu, trying to work out what's going to happen in the winter, whether the NHS will be overloaded. We've been doing that for decades. We'll do the same thing coronavirus, and hopefully the big shift will be that neither the politicians nor indeed the media or the public are taking anything like as much interest in it as they are now, because it's just become a normal part of life. That's my hope.
So really, in a way, you're hoping that what you do in day to day becomes boring to the rest of us.
Exactly.
Well, Mark Woolhouse, I love that, somebody who's hoping that his own job will not be of any interest to anybody else.